One of the beauties of yoga is that it inconspicuously works on your core. We can certainly get some very good targeted muscle development with certain poses, arm balances, chair pose, one-legged balances, but all of these things are based on core, which is a difference between yoga and resistance exercise. I talk about endurance training, I talk about resistance exercise. In all my videos I haven't talked about core, and I think it's important to note. A lot of patients that I see will usually have either a ventral hernia or an umbilical hernia. Sometimes the ones that everybody knows about will be the inguinal hernias. Those are the ones that most guys will have in the groin. Now, a ventral hernia is usually just an area of weakness right in the center of the abdomen. The rectus abdominis muscles go right down alongside. There are two strips. They go from the bottom of the ribs to the suprapubic symphysis. And they're supposed to be really thick. If they're thick, there's no space between them. But as they thin or become atrophied because of non-use or stretching because your belly gets too big, they thin out. When they thin out, you press out hard enough and you'll see a little bubble come up, a balloon. And that is a ventral hernia. Those, as long as they're not painful, they're not necessarily dangerous, but they do lead to problems down the line. It's usually an indication you got to work on your core, because if you have a weak abdomen, likelihood is you're going to have back problems sooner or later. Now, the objective with developing those rectus abdominis muscles or the transversus abdominis muscles or the obliques is to do something repetitively, just like the resistance or the endurance training. So the easiest thing I can tell you is you don't have to, I mean, it would be nice if you joined the gym, as long as it's not too expensive, and maybe had a physical therapist or an athletic trainer or a personal trainer design a routine specifically for you that is sustainable and it's designed just for you. But if you can't get to the previous things I just mentioned or people I just mentioned, well, you can always do some basic core work. The first thing I'm going to show you is boat pose. When you in yoga, there's one pose in particular, it's called boat. You can either start at an incline, almost like a V at the thighs and a V at the upper back. And the objective is to hold in a certain degree of this angle and just breathe. Now, I'm able to breathe and talk, but I am flexing and contracting my abdomen. Sometimes if you want to add to that, you add weight to the lower extremity. I can add weight to my upper extremity by leaning back more. It just puts more leverage and more work on my abs. Or you can lift your feet up. Full boat pose is when you have the legs out extended and the arms go up. And usually if you do this with your chest radiating out, you do work the abdomen for a short time. And you work on your breath and you return. So usually if you do that, that's an isometric exercise. You do that, you rest, you do it again, you rest, and you do it for about 5 repetitions. That actually is pretty good. In yoga, when I run a yoga class, I'll usually go through a couple of different core exercises. We'll go through some poses towards the middle, right after the middle part of the, say 30 minutes. Then we get into core, and then we finish off and slow down and work on breath exercise. Another way to develop the core or the abdomen is also to do crunches. So the boat pose is a typical pose that's specifically found in yoga books. Core work, when you do crunches, usually you have to, it's better that you keep the legs bent instead of doing the classic sit-ups. So you can do alternate leg, knee, elbow touches, or reaches, or bicycle pedals. So we'll lay back and do another one. So in the supine position, you want your arms behind your head, elbows out. You can bring your knees up, and then one at a time lower and touch opposite. And this works to not only have you hold and lift and work on the abdomen, but it also calls in the obliques. Sometimes if that's too much, you can just try to lift up, keeping the knees down. And the idea is not to, I'm in a limited area here, the idea is not to just bring the elbow up. The idea is to lift the chest off whatever surface you're lying on and twist. So those are crunches. And there's different ways to do a crunch, but those are the basics. So you have boat pose, you have different varieties of crunch, and then finally there's something called plank. Plank is essentially when you're doing a push-up. Usually I'll finish this after having done some routine workout with or warming up of the abdomen. So in plank pose, it's almost like doing a push-up, but as you know, when you're doing a push-up, you have to get the trunk and the core strong. So the challenge would be just to hold and breathe. I'll show you how you can also develop the core in the opposite direction with a pull-up bar in a second. Sometimes if you need more challenge or your wrists are tender, you go down to your forearms and you just hold for the breath. You try to make sure that your legs are straight, and between there's an invisible line that goes from the crown to the heels, and it should be relatively straight. And usually when you hold that position, it again just accentuates and continues on the contraction to not only the abdomen area but the lower back too. Another option if you want to use chin-up bars for core work is to get one of these doorway jams. This was a Walmart bought product and it comes in a standard size. I had to buy the extensions because of the handicap accessible doors. If you do this in a standard house, you might just be able to get away with this. It was like 20 to 30 bucks. So as I showed you with crunches and plank and boat pose, sometimes if you get tired of those, if you want to add a little more variety, also if you want to build upper body and it looks pretty cool, you use these things and I'll show you how. I usually will get it to the position where I get pull-up ready, and then I'll just keep the trunk, the lower extremities straight and lift straight up. Sometimes you can do a figure L. I used to see these things in Bruce Lee movies when he would climb up and down ropes. You can do a figure L if you're just starting out, or bend at the knees. So we'll try the knee bend, the figure L, and then the full body lift. To get comfortable, the first is to do knee lifts. And you just hold the knee lift. You can sometimes do a little variety, and or you can try figure L's. And you hold, or you can also do a, I call it a dead man lift, just for a second to do some repetitions. So this is like so. So it takes a lot out. Obviously I'm lifting body weight, and not only am I working core, I'm also working upper body. It's a combination of different things, but again, just varieties so you won't get tired or bored of doing the same old thing. And then again, if you get a good enough heart rate going and you've worked a little bit of core without getting too fatigued, then you're set.